Let's stay with the story and speak to Political Analyst Elvis Masoga. Elvis, thank you so much for your time this evening. You're looking at what is happening in that particular municipality, a very worrying situation. I'll get to that video in just a moment. But what do you make of the developments around this municipality?
Yeah, firstly, my humble greetings to you, Bongiwe, and all the viewers of SABC News. Yeah, I believe you'll agree with me, Bongiwe, that the aspect of violence, a violent consciousness, it is becoming a manifestation of the national psyche in South Africa. It is not an isolated incident. Whenever there are differences, whenever there are altercations, it might even be among family members, among employees and workers, among classmates. Anywhere, we are witnessing this evolution of a violent consciousness among South Africans. The way we react, we've become, a new human species that believes in physical reaction rather than, embracing harmony, embracing kindness, embracing tolerance. So the violence that we see during, demonstration, be they political demonstrations, trade union demonstrations, academic demonstrations at our colleges and universities, we need to finally agree as a nation that we have become gripped under the weight of this violent consciousness that has started to define how we react to things that we don't understand. The violence that manifests in families, the violence that manifests at the workplace, during student protest, during trade union protest, it has become a manifestation of to me, it's a national disease that we must address as a nation. But to focus on isolated incidents, it will not, provide a long-term solution to it. Because to me, it's a national disaster we need to attend to it. Because almost anywhere, the way the police react, they will react violently. The way community members protest, they will protest violently. So it's not easy to point fingers. We need to undertake a national introspection as a nation to agree that this violent consciousness is gradually destroying our country.
And as you talk about this violent consciousness, then it doesn't come as a surprise then if I'm listening to you that, workers are protesting and then there's now the hiring of extra security, which is also costing millions to this municipality that is also supposed to be providing services to people. And the hiring of this, private security further then heightens the tensions as opposed to sitting around the table and trying to find one another.
Yeah, it is actually a manifestation of a zero-sum game. Fight fire with fire. When we protest, we are going to throw all sorts of things at the police. And the police, maybe they feel besieged or threatened. They will also want to fight fire at the fire that community protesters are doing. So there's no middle ground. That's why I'm saying the best way to address this, we need to dig, deeper into this national psyche as a nation to say why the majority of South Africans, we have become to embrace this violent way of reacting to things that we don't agree with. You check even the sentiment, even at Parliament, in our National Assembly, there are symptoms of violence. A place that is supposed to be for honorable members, it is easy to can see violence erupting among members. And I don't understand where does it come from, but like I'm saying, yes, we can talk about the violent protest that is engulfing Steve Tshwete Municipality, but to me it's not an isolated incident. It is a broader manifestation of this side, this specter of violent consciousness that has gripped the South African populace. At school, in churches, political parties, National Assembly, within family households, the ghost of violence is there. The way the husband reacts to the wife, the way the wife reacts to the husband, the way classmates react, the bullying, the violence in our schools. So it's an indication that we are gripped by a national disaster that we must address as a nation.
And especially when you look at the crime stats, even talking about how in the period under review, 19 of, some of the deaths happened at institutions of learning, daycare centers. And this really is a worrying picture. And I wonder if we stay with it in the context of protests, Elvis, I wonder how much of it is based on this, because I spoke to the Center for the Study of Violence a few weeks ago, and they talk about how people start to feel that officials only listen when they become violent. That's when they get the officials' attention. How much of what we are seeing in the protest context is also attributed to that?
Yeah, it's. I remember some years back, I had a one-on-one discussion with a well-known politician who was part of the liberation struggle, and I said to him that, remember in the 80s, I lived in the 70s and the 80s. So politicians, told us to throw stones at apartheid, apparatus and superstructure. Whenever we see an apartheid police van, an apartheid military truck passing, we must throw stones, we must hate them. So this violent reaction, we learned as a young boy in the 70s and 80s, we learned that we must react violently to the symbols of apartheid. But when the dawn of democracy came in 1994, the leaders of the liberation movements forgot to orientate our psyche and mentality to say, particularly you South Africans or black South Africans, we are no longer throwing all sorts of violent objects at government. This is a new democratic government. Let's stop burning public property. Let's stop throwing stones at police vans. So they forgot to do that. And you can see the current nature of protests, community protests. They are still the very same protests that we used to do during apartheid. So there's never been a transition. That's why the spectre of violence escalated from the apartheid era into the new democratic dispensation, because the violence that I'm seeing today is the very same violence that we used to see in the 80s, in the 70s, but usually orchestrated by political reasons because we were on the side of the liberation movements. So my feeling is that the apartheid era violent consciousness has transcended into the democratic era. That's why you see burning of buildings, burning of schools, the very same thing that was done during apartheid. We are also doing it right now. So I think we didn't have a thorough moral and ethical cleansing ceremony when democracy came in 1994.
So very briefly then, what do you think then those in positions of influence should be doing to ensure that, South Africans are socialized differently, but also we do not see a repeat of what you're talking about?
Remember the family, the school, the church and the media are the four basic agents of socialization. They've got a role to play in terms of grooming children when it comes to moral and ethics. Like you check, during our times in the 80s, there were some programs at schools like, praying in the morning, instilling discipline, emphasizing the value of morals and ethics. But nowadays, you can no longer find it. You can no longer find it. And it helped to a certain extent to create a positive and favorable relationship between teachers and learners, between church, pastors, and church members. But nowadays, morals and ethics are dead. Any person does as he or she wishes. So it's easy to point fingers. But when you delve deeper into the real cause, you are going to realize that somewhere, somehow, as a nation, we abandon the value of ethics and morals. Young boys, they grow up believing that it's trendy and customary to be violent. Young girls grow up knowing that they will be victims of boys. And that's why you see every day women are raped, girls are raped, little girls are being kidnapped. Why? Because we are besieged by this violent consciousness. It has become a monster that is terrorizing our community. Up until we address that, I don't think we are going to solve the problem.
All right. Thank you so much, Elvis, for your time. That is Elvis Masoga, a political analyst, just talking to us about the situation that we saw unfold in the Steve Tshwete Municipality, saying that it is not an isolated incident. There is now, a need like never before to attend to some of the violence that we are seeing being meted out, particularly during, protests that we have been seeing. And also, we are juxtaposing this with the crime stats that were released a little earlier on today.